All right, welcome everybody to the Tech Report podcast. Tonight we have just two of us here, me and Jeff Cameron. Say hi, Jeff.
Hi, everybody.
And we are going to, it has been an incredibly busy week with E3 and new announcements and a lot of news from AMD about new Radeons. So we are going to focus on all of that stuff that's happened this week, especially the new graphics stuff. We've got, I think, a lot of potential for questions from the chat as we go. So if you're watching the live stream and you are interested in these things, go ahead and get your questions in. And what we're going to do, I think, is Jeff is going to kind of run interference here and look at the stream, look at the questions you guys have, and hit me with them. I've been out in LA at E3. I went to AMD's announcement their press event this week for the new Radeons. I went to the PC Gaming show. I talked with some architects and people at AMD, and I have a bunch of information in my head, and I've just finished an article that we just posted right before the show went live about the Radeon Fury X architecture, kind of summarizing what we know. We don't have a card to test yet, but AMD has provided some performance results that you can kind of take or leave, but we have a general picture of how this product may compare to the GeForce GTX 980 Ti, which is the key competitor, and all of that. So we've got a lot to talk about, and Jeff, what do you think we should start with?
Well, let's go ahead, let's go at the very beginning, and let's talk about what AMD announced on Tuesday morning. What all did they introduce?
Okay, so we've got a live blog that we can pull up here to go with our discussion. I was there at this thing, and they had everybody up to AMD CEO Lisa Su on stage to talk about the new Radeons. And they announced several things, I guess you'd say. The most exciting was clearly the Radeon Fiji GPU and then the Radeon Fury products based on that. And that's a new high-end GPU from AMD. We already knew that it uses this new type of memory called HBM, or high bandwidth memory, that is amazingly, because of the name, a very high bandwidth form of memory that makes it basically a candidate to be the fastest graphics card in the world. And really interesting because I think HBM is the future of graphics memory and maybe even memory for other types of devices going forward. I think for all players, I think this is going to be a new industry standard. But this is the first implementation, and AMD has it exclusively in this generation because they had a big hand in collaborating with the memory makers and other players in the market to make HBM happen. And the product of that plus a brand new big GPU is the Radeon Fury lineup. And the Furies are, there are four of them, right?
Yeah, they announced four of them. There was at the very top end, there's a unnamed card with two Fury GPUs on it, right?
Yeah, and it's like coming late, like probably early fall, I think. We don't really know exactly.
Something like that. Yeah, we don't know much about that card. But then right below that is the Fury X, right? The R9 Fury X.
Yeah, and that is the first to launch. It's the highest end single GPU.
So it's coming the 24th of this month?
Yeah, it's coming less than a week from today. So
yeah.
I'm asking AMD, like, when do I get one to test? But like, it's imminent, and so here we go. And the Fury X is going to be $650, $649.99, and it's positioned directly against the GeForce GTX 980 Ti. That's the big matchup, and it looks like it could either win or, and we can get into some of these the numbers later.
Yeah.
But
it
could either win or tie that, and that's a very high-end card.
Yeah,
right. And it's an interesting part because the board is like, I think 7.5 inches long.
Yeah, it's really weird looking. It's like nothing else because it's water cooled too, right?
Yeah. So the board is long.
Axis.
We got a picture we can pull up here. The board is long, and then the water cooler sticks out of the back of the thing, and you mount it separately like you would a CPU water cooler, on your case and a emplacement for it. And so the physical size of the total solution is actually probably larger than your standard graphics card.
Right.
But the board itself is small.
And it seems like they get something out of the water cooler, which we'll talk about when we talk about the microarchitecture.
Yeah. So that is the deal there, and
that's Fury X.
Right.
And then there's another sorry, go on.
Oh, well, they didn't. The weird one is the Fury. And when I say the weird one, I mean this is maybe the most interesting product, but it also, there are no pictures. And the reason there are no pictures is that all of the Fury X cards are going to be they are built on AMD's reference design. They are not to be overclocked. They will all be the same. And that is AMD taking control to make sure that product is right. The Fury is the lower end product. This can be $550, and that one you can have water-cooled versions or you can have air-cooled versions, but it will be up to the add-in board makers in terms of what that is. And so the Fury is coming, I think it's July 14th.
Yeah, it's sometime in July 14th.
And it will look different depending on whose version you're talking about in terms of what the cooler is, what the cooler looks like, how long it is. I think we'll see some very traditional sort of dual slot, longer card coolers. The card may be shorter, but the cooler itself may protrude, right? In order to give you a sort of a standard build and form factor. And if those coolers are good, they could perform pretty well. We don't actually know, the Fury is cut down in terms of the number of units compared to the Fury X. And unfortunately, I don't have the stats on exactly what the unit counts are there or clock speeds yet. So that stuff is probably we'll get that closer to launch, or maybe I'll get it if I ask tomorrow. I don't. AMD's been weird about the way information is coming out about these things.
Yeah.
A ton just came out today, more than I could reasonably expect to write about. On the plane yesterday back from their event.
You did a valiant job with it, though.
I didn't. I suffered greatly from jet lag, but there's an article there, and there's more to be said. So we'll try to make up for some of it tonight. And then the last one, Jeff, is interesting. It's this Nano.
Right.
And you
I was
noticed,
most excited about this card.
Yeah, and you noticed it's not called a Fury. I was like, no way, it's not called. It's called the Radeon R9 Nano, not Fury Nano, or R9 Fury Nano, or whatever. You keep stringing stuff together. But this is 6 inches?
Yeah, 6 inches long, and it's just a dual slot cooler with a single fan on it. So it just looks a lot like a lot of other mini ITX targeted graphics cards out there these days. But
and this thing is a full Fiji chip. There are no units cut down.
Right.
Don't have a price. And then what the deal is with this is basically it's going to perform like the cooling will allow, I think is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
If that little cooler can keep the card cool enough, it will have the same clock speed as the water-cooled thing.
Right.
I think. Or something, or at least it will range up. And then realistically, I think it will probably have to be quite a bit, or somewhat slower in order to.
Right. Because I think I was skimming the architecture article, and we said these aren't significantly more power efficient than the Hawaii chips. Is that correct?
Oh, well, that's an architecture question. I think when you look at the amount of stuff that they packed in here, it has to be more power efficient because actually, the Fury X is 275 watts, and the 290 RNA 290X, which is quite a bit, in some respects, 50% less graphics resources, is I think 290 watts, and so this is clearly more power efficient. A lot of that isn't like when Nvidia went from Kepler to Maxwell. A lot of the efficiency gains were architecture, and in this case, I think a lot of the efficiency gains are other tricks. There are valid things to do, but they're not necessarily the same thing as, this is still GCN. This is a newer version of GCN, but most of the additional efficiency comes from other places. So that's kind of what I was talking about in the architecture article. And one of the places it comes from is that in the big Fury X, that water cooler, they run it at, I think they run the GPU at around 52 degrees Celsius.
Right, right.
And so we've seen this when we tested GPUs. In fact, we heat GPUs up before we measure their power consumption, because a cool GPU is power efficient, and once it gets warm, then it starts to leak. It needs more power to be stable. It's wasting power in the form of heat, and that kind of builds on itself over time. So when you get a hot GPU, you have a power efficient GPU. So there's a non-negligible amount of power savings that AMD is probably getting out of that water cooler.
Right.
So that's an interesting dynamic, and it's not really architecture, but it's a valid way to do it. It's also the case that, like, you start to understand why there's some interesting questions about what the Radeon Fury without the water cooler looks like.
Right. And and the Nano even.
Right.
Like,
and the Nano.
What are they going to get out of that chip? I mean, it's like, just with that cooler. So.
Yeah. And honestly, we don't know. It could be a lot less performance. And still be one of the best mini ITX cards, or at least, I mean, a 6-inch card. It's probably going up against from Nvidia something more like a 970 or something.
970s, right?
Yeah, and the question, but we don't know. Like, the question is, what is?
Yeah, they showed this thing off. They didn't tell us much about it.
Yeah.
But it's still interesting.
It is, and we have 4 new GPUs, and then they built this thing. We should call this out. This is the Project Quantum, and Project Quantum is they had this on stage. I took this picture by standing up in front of it. It's a prototype PC, like a desktop gaming system that AMD built. And it's got these 2 segments. And the lower segment, I saw, like, have you seen a cutaway of this, Jeff?
I've seen, like, various pictures, but I didn't get, like, a look at the internals.
So the lower section is like the CPU and motherboard. And then the upper section is the graphics. And it's actually dual Fijis in there. So they've got 2 of those things with their small form factor, and probably, I don't know how it's cooled exactly. I didn't really get into it and look. I assume there may not even be room really for water, but I assume it's got to be pretty effective. Anyway, the dual Fijis in it, and so it should be a killer gaming rig. I think it's got an Intel CPU in it even, which is an interesting development.
It's kind of funny.
But, you know, the thing about Project Quantum is it's a great photo op, but it's not a product unless somebody who's a partner, like a PC maker, partners up with AMD and decides to make this thing. Because it's not something that like they just release themselves. They've done some of these in the past with some of their like mini APUs, and they did like a little teeny prototype thing with one of the Pumas or whatever, and it never became, as far as I know, a product. So, but they do this to kind of show people what the possibilities are, and in this case with high bandwidth memory, which is this like signature innovation on the Fiji chip. They have a really small physical footprint, and that lets them build a PC in a really small case with a ton of power. I mean, this is triple 4K displays. And what are you going to do with this thing? I mean, you know, it's a ton of power. So that's exciting and interesting too. And all of this stuff they live streamed it. I live blogged it, and there's a ton of detail that goes along with it. I don't know. Is there anything else I'm missing that's like super important just to set it up?
For the Fiji chips? No, I think that's all they discussed. But there was like a whole slew of other announcements. Like the latest R9 300 series cards, I think, is what the other half of the presentation was, right?
Yeah, and I would love to give you guys, I'd love to pull up the web page and show you my article about the R9 300 series. There are 2 reasons why I don't have. Well, there are 3 or 4 reasons why I don't have anything up. One of them is that I didn't get a card to review yet, and it appears that they just didn't really focus on that for these cards. One reason why they didn't, and this is sort of goes into the next reason why I'm not super juiced about this, is these are rebranded versions of existing chips, and I can kind of walk you through what those are. But there's a new series of Radeon R9 300 cards, and there's a 360, 370, 380, 390, and they correlate to Radeons in the R9 200 series, and in a lot of cases to the Radeon HD series, the Radeon HD 7000 series. I think some had a Radeon HD 8000 series version, like for OEMs. So these have been rebranded a lot, and I could see somebody in the chat saying "rebrandion." I thought that was a good. that was funny.
Yeah, that pretty much describes it.
And you know, Nvidia does that too. They did it with the GeForce GTX 660, 7,
right.
whatever.
They got a lot of mileage. Yeah, the 660 and 760 were both. I forget the name.
Oh well, it was really like the 670 and was the 760. It was more complicated, but the point is.
GPU makers do this all the time.
AMD has done it more because they release fewer chips. Nvidia just did a refresh of their whole lineup based on the new Maxwell architecture. And it's like pretty much everything out there now in the GTX 900 series is brand new. What AMD is doing is they've got several new cards based on this Fiji GPU with HBM. It's a significant innovation. And then they're rebranding the rest of them to the R9 300 series.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have all the like exact specs of the. I feel terrible about this about the 300 series cards in front of me, but I can take you through what they have. So the
let's take a look at that.
The Radeon R9 360 is the lowest end one, and it's based on the Bonaire chip, and Bonaire was also the card inside the Radeon HD 7790. And the Radeon R7 260X. So it's familiar from both of those. I don't know there may be been an 8000 series name for that, but it like first debuted in March of 2013, and it's been carried forward in multiple forms. The most like astonishing one then is the R7 3. I said R9 360. It's gonna be R7 360. And I guess probably I think the next one is R7 370. I don't know when the R9 turns on.
Well, I'm looking at like a page where we got these leaks for all the OEM cards, and that actually starts at the R7 340.
I don't know anything about that, but I'm sure they've got lower end versions for OEMs.
So, the R9s start at the 360.
Okay, so really? Okay, so anyway, the 370 is the most interesting in a lot of ways because it's based on a chip called Pitcairn. Which actually, like, as they do the rebranding, they actually do different code names. I think Pitcairn got another name at some point, but it's the same. It's the same thing. Pitcairn first debuted in March of 2012 aboard the Radeon HD 7870, and then it became the Radeon R9 270. And now it's the Radeon R9 370. And Pitcairn is... Well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's interesting for some reasons in this product lineup because it stands out in some ways that are not actually great. Then we had the Radeon R9 380, which is based on Tonga, which is the same thing as the Radeon R9 285. In fact, I don't think there's any specs difference between those cards. Like clock speeds, I don't think there are any tweaks or anything. It's just the same thing, and that's going to compete with the GeForce GTX 960. It's a fine product for probably for what it is, a little higher power consumption than the GeForce, but Tonga is, well, we'll talk about. I don't want to get into architecture till we get to the last one. So the last ones are the Radeon R9 390 and 390X, and those are basically very similar to the R9 290 and 290X, except they've tweaked clocks a little, and I think memory clocks a little more.
They got a minor clock bump, and the memory clocks are significantly higher, at least in terms of if we're inferring from the bandwidth increase, I believe.
Right, and
the specs.
I've got all the specs for that. I'll get them to you, but I just don't have them all memorized in my head yet, and I haven't written about them. I may never have them in my head because rebrands don't stick. They don't. I have to admit.
It's understandable.
But yeah, these things, both the 390 and 390X are 8 gig. Every version of them it has 8 gigs of memory instead of 4. So that's an upgrade that they did. The funky thing about that is because of limits of HBM, the Fury cards top out at 4 gigs. And they decided, well, we're not going to limit ourselves with these others. And so there's this question about, like, if you don't need more than 4 gigs, why are we getting more than 4? And that plays into the most significant feature, I think, of the 390X, which is the price. And you wrote about this today, didn't you?
Yeah, we took a look at a couple cards from Asus and Sapphire, I think it was, because everybody released their custom boards today, and so I went out, I looked at Newegg just to see how much these were. So like R9 390Xs are going for about $430, and 390s are going for about $330, which is considerably more expensive than there were heavy discounts on the 290 and 290X, and they were below $350. So the price is a little bit. It's
not good, man.
It takes some getting used to.
Yeah, it's not good, and I think that these prices are for people who don't know any better. That's a rough thing to say, but I have a hard time with that, and I'm less generous about it than maybe I would be, because they're not exactly like, hey, test this thing, it's a great product.
Right.
So what does that tell you?
Yeah.
And we already know that the shape of it in terms of how older Radeons match up with GeForces. AMD's going to price these. And they're going to tune them so that the performance is comparable to the competing GeForce as much as possible for that price segment. Once they reach that point with the older technology, the older GCN technology, they're going to have a lot higher power consumption. So they're going to need a bigger cooler. They're going to put more heat into your case. And, you're going to need a beefier power supply in some cases, because sometimes the deltas are fairly large. In terms of performance and even the plug requirements, whether you need 6-pin, dual 6-pin, 6+8, whatever, depending on the segment. So that's kind of like they've got a credible option at each point, and this refresh, I think, brings them to a nicer place competitively than where they were with the old products in most cases, except for that 390X price. But we know, like, the shape of that contest, and it's really good to be NVIDIA, where you have new technology in the form of the Maxwell architecture out there to compete with these older things. And let's go real quick, and I'm going to try to do this, Jeff. But you want to go through the chip generations, because we go from R9 360 or whatever, R7, whatever that is, through the 390X, and there are, I counted 4 chips with 3 chip generations. So
I can't do that off the top of my head.
Well, fortunately, I have an outline. So I wrote this myself off the top of my head mostly, but let's do this. So Pitcairn in the 370 is the most interesting, because it came out a long time ago, and it was March 2012, and it has the same technology as the Radeon HD 7970, which came out in late 2011. It was like the first gen DirectX 11 part from AMD. It was good at the time. It's very similar. Actually, everything about Pitcairn is very similar to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 in terms of resources. That's good at analog for it. But it can't do FreeSync. It doesn't have the true audio block that I don't think anybody's using anyway, but all the other Radeons do. It doesn't have XDMA crossfire, so unique amongst the 300 series, it has an external crossfire connector. All the others do crossfire over PCI Express. It has fewer of the ACE engines, the asynchronous compute engines, that AMD ramped up in later GCN chips, which means maybe bad things for certain things like VR, although really, like, the Oculus requirements are basically a 390 or 290, so it doesn't matter for that. But it has fewer of those, and it has slower tessellation. There are probably some other things, but, like, it's weird because the next step up the generations are Bonaire and Hawaii, which means the 360 is way better feature set than the 370. So they have XDMA crossfire, true audio, FreeSync support, more Ace engines, the whole thing. And Bonaire and Hawaii is the big one. It's in the 390 and 390X, are basically the same generation of technology. It's a little weird to say that because Bonaire debuted as a Radeon HD 7000 series card, and when we reviewed it, we didn't know that it had True Audio, XDMA Crossfire, more Ace engines, and all the new architectural stuff that they put in Hawaii till later. And then they're like, hey, surprise! But I don't even know if all those features are even enabled on the 7790 or whatever it was that it came out on. But so that's like a tour of the past with that. Then the most advanced, not in terms of highest end, but most advanced chip in the 300 series is Tonga, which has the stuff called the Sea Islands generation of parts. So no, not Sea Islands. It's got all those other two Sea Islands. And you see, this all gets crazy. Tonga is its own thing, basically. But it has all of the Sea Island stuff, all the stuff from Bonaire and Hawaii, plus this delta color compression for the frame buffer. So it's basically faster with less memory bandwidth, which is really good. It has faster tessellation. It has the support for FP16 floating point. That's a power saving optimization. It has some context switching stuff for compute. It has a 4K video scaler and a faster UVD block for encoding and decoding, or I think at least decoding 4K video quickly. I think both, actually. So it is the best of the things in terms of feature set, but it's substantially slower than Hawaii, which is on the 390 and 390X.
Right.
And so we should move on from the 300 series because it's not the most exciting, but these things are all there's a weird mix of things when you look at the products. And if you're like this naive consumer who doesn't understand that these are rebrands, because there are significant differences in feature set. Not all of them plug into the FreeSync monitors and the Crossfire, the big ones with that pit Karen.
I mean, yeah, and it's really, I mean, it really gives me pause that they're still selling a card that can't do FreeSync, but.
Yeah, the best thing though about the 300 series, I think, is that they got rid of the Tahiti chip that was the first ever GCN chip on the Radeon HD 7790. It's been around forever. They were selling those on the R9 280s, 280Xs, and it was time. And so they've gotten rid of those, and they've pretty much just got Tonga and then Hawaii, which is the right thing. So so yeah, we'll get. I expect to get at least like a 380 and 380X. I hope to test. So we will have those, and we'll give you the performance numbers on them. And it's possible that there's additional goodness there because of the memory tuning, because of maybe some other little tweaks that they've done, and they could be good products generally, just with regard to some stuff. In fact, one of the more interesting things that we can do, Jeff, is we can get a 290X and we get a 390X, and we have a 4 gig card and an 8 gig card, and we can test in 4K and see if we can find. We could even clock them the same. We can test in 4K and see if we can find instances where the 4 gig card stumbles and the 8 gig card doesn't.
Right.
And so that will tell us, this sort of answer that question of, is it an issue?
Yeah.
It's not going to tell us the same thing on Fiji, because I think that's a different animal. There's so much,
that's totally.
Well, there's so much bandwidth
ballgame
with HBM that there's some possibilities for even like overrunning the local memory, and it's just totally different. So I think that we need to be careful about making assumptions there. But honestly, I hope within the next week we're testing the 4 gig Fiji directly, and we can report good things.
That's what I'm excited about. So, but
right,
and
that is we should move on.
But yeah, okay. So with Fury being the hot thing, we have a ton of reader questions. We're going to go through and try and get through them quickly, in no particular order. So go ahead, and if you haven't already submitted a question, you're in the Twitch chat, just go ahead and post. I'll keep an eye on it as we go, but let's go ahead and jump right in. So a big question that several people have asked is, why doesn't the Fiji chip, I guess, have HDMI 2.0 or DisplayPort 1.3? They're saying HDMI 1.4 and DisplayPort 1.2a aren't that great for 4K gaming. Do we know anything about that, or did they address that issue at all?
It is the case that the display block on this card hasn't changed substantially from the Tonga, and as a result, HDMI 2.0 is not supported by this card, and that's noteworthy because HDMI 2.0 is what enables 4K over HDMI at 60 hertz. So if you're a gamer who wants to buy a big HD TV that's 4K and play games at a good refresh rate in your living room or just in your face on your desk or however it is you want to do that, unfortunately, that's not going to work unless you can find one with DisplayPort. And DisplayPort is great, but it's not the standard that the consumer electronics people prefer. And there are a lot of kind of interesting right now TV options, bigger screen options at low cost that just come with HDMI. So that's unfortunate. I think AMD missed the boat on that one. And so, Nvidia does support HDMI 2.0, I believe, in the Maxwell stuff. So like the GTX 980 Ti will do that. And so that sort of limits some of the market for a really high-end expensive card, which you expect to pair with a 4K display of one type or another. I don't think it hurts that much, because personally, that's not how I want to play, right? I want to get either a 4K display or a 144 hertz 2560 by 1440 display to pair with a Fury X. That's what I want. And as a PC gamer, I think that's the way to do it. And I want to do it sitting at a desk. And, TVs are not made for sitting really close. And a lot of times they don't have the fidelity that you want, the pixel density that you want. Even with 4K, when you get big enough TV, pixel density's balls. It's no good. So I don't know, I don't know that it's the end of the world, but it is a case that it's a little bit of a disadvantage. There's the possibility for an adapter, but I don't think we've seen any for like DisplayPort to HDMI.
Yeah, those weird intermediary things tend to be complicated and expensive. So, all right, so let's move on to the next question. And readers ask, which fan will the Fury X ship with? They say the U3 card and the Fury X in some videos have a high-speed Nidec, I guess, Gentle Typhoon fan, but other promotional images have what appears to be a cheaper Cooler Master FP120. Did you get any information on that? Or I haven't seen these images, so
I know.
Take a look. Okay.
Yeah, I talked to the product manager for the Fury X, and he said that it was a Cooler Master solution for the cooling. So I would expect that we're looking at a Cooler Master fan. But it's entirely possible that AMD chose Cooler Master for the radiator and liquid cooling portion and picked somebody else for the fan. And I don't know the answer to that. That's one of those that as soon as we get one to test, then we can answer.
Right, yeah, and I'm looking at this picture, and it looks a lot like the Silencio fans that they ship on their radiators. So it's a good fan.
I was going to say, I know that like if you're a silent PC review guy and you have like constant tinnitus and you're kind of like seriously like, oh, the sound, like you might not like that fan, but Silencio fans are fine. Like they're not bad at all. I've got a bunch of them. You can't hear them because they're all running, but they're quiet in my PC next to my desk, and I have no problems with that. So now, if it spins up, maybe the more expensive fans are better, but honestly, like even spun up, they're not that bad.
Yeah, I like the Silencios. So, okay, so next is, I guess this is a question. They say Tonga's texture compression mojo is here too. Could that partially offset this quote unquote small 4 GB capacity, but Maxwell, Maxwell cards apparently have a similar feature.
So yeah, texture compression, or not texture compression, but memory color compression. It's textures and whatever color thing you're writing into the memory, compressed on these cards using a delta-based color compression algorithm that is substantially more effective than what we've seen on like the Hawaii GPU and the R9 And when you're writing something into memory, it's more compact. Then it's possible that you save capacity in the DRAM itself. I'm not sure exactly how that's all managed, and that's probably like dark voodoo in AMD's drivers that like the OS doesn't see. But it is possible that there's some memory capacity gains or savings from that mean that you don't run into a limitation that really hurts with having a 4 gig card quite as soon.
Right.
And honestly, I've tested these things a lot. I have yet to find a place where a 4 gig card hurts in a 4K test and it's clearly memory. And I tested the Titan X and the GeForce GTX 960 Ti at a 6 and a 12 gig card, and they performed exactly the same, which tells me that the difference between 6 and 8 or 12 is basically nil on the GeForce side. Whether or not 4 gigs as a capacity for that product is a serious limitation is something I think you have to answer by using the product with the latest drivers and see what happens. I think the worst case scenario for AMD is probably not that it's just worse. I honestly don't think it's going to be a big deal, but I think that probably what they could run into is an issue where they need to tune their drivers per game to perform well at like high res with high anti-aliasing levels. And if it becomes this thing where they have to chase that a lot, I think people will be sick of that, because that's one of the things that's no fun about like Crossfire, where you do multi GPU and then the latest games come out and you have to wait for them to do a driver update and all of that. I think that's probably the type of thing that you see now. Longer term, I think the concern a lot of people have also is most of the consoles have a unified memory architecture with 8 gigs of RAM. The Xbox One, PlayStation 4. After they have the OS and everything loaded, I think they have about 6 gigs free. They have to share that with the CPU, but it's possible that you'll have games that will use that memory, fill it with lots of assets, textures, and polygons and things to make a game look beautiful, and they'll get ported to the PC, and the expectation will be got to have quite a bit of RAM to do well. And you combine that with super high resolutions where you need a lot of RAM just for the display space, and you could have an issue. This is going to play out over a long period of time, because it depends on how games are developed and stuff. And I don't know. I think that, but this is, just to be clear, it's a limitation of HBM, which is one of the key innovations in the Radeon Fury. And I don't think they're not going to get around it until like new like HBM2 or later revisions of HBM stacks are available.
Okay, and then another memory question is, someone asked, remember your interview with an AMD guy that said memory use was laughably bad because they never put an engineer on it, but now they've put several on it? Do you have any more of the story on how/when this is unfolding?
Yeah, so the guy I talked to at AMD about this particular issue that we've just been discussing is a guy named Joe Macri. And it came up in the context of a conversation with Joe, but Joe was the HBM guy. He was telling me about HBM. And so I was like, well, okay, now you've told me about the 4 gig capacity. Is that going to be a problem? And he's product CTO is his title at AMD. But honestly, like, he's just a brilliant engineer who has done GDDR5 and GDDR4 and now HBM, and has a long history of doing good things in the memory space. He's not a software engineer. He's not a GPU architect, and he doesn't really, he's not responsible. He's not one of the engineers who you would put onto the task of optimizing for memory capacity. So I was talking with Joe just a couple days ago in a group of journalists, and we were asking again about the question of memory capacity, and his answer was basically, I'm not the guy to talk to about that. Even though I gave you like an overall take, I can't give you any more specifics, which is what we were wanting, right? Which is, I think, what the question is here. Do you have any more on how the story is unfolding? The story, honestly, though, is going to unfold in the next week. We're going to have the thing to test. We're going to push it, and we'll be able to do some interesting tests with it. And you know, we can ramp up the memory capacity. In fact, there was a discussion in the comments about this because they wanted me to track memory usage with the software tool while testing. And I've talked with some of the GPU guys about that, and they've told me that basically those public common tools for testing GPU memory allocation are showing you like what the OS does, and they don't actually have a lot to do with what the GPU and drivers are really doing. And so if you want to know how much the card capacity is really being used at a given time, you need a different tool that's not necessarily publicly available. And so I don't think we're going to be able to put a metric on it just by like acting like an engineer at one of these companies and having a number, but we can definitely do like really smart things, like we're going to test with 4x MSAA, then we're going to test with 8x, and then we'll test with 16x EQAA, and we'll ramp the demand for bandwidth each time and see if it falls off a cliff. If it falls off a cliff, it's not a bandwidth issue anymore, it's capacity. So we'll test it.
Yeah,
yeah, that's the answer.
All right. So, okay, moving on. Someone asks, will we ever see a Fiji Fire Pro? A high bandwidth / low latency memory pool on a small printed circuit board might interest some customers, but the 4 gigabyte limit will not. I guess that's their opinion. But what do you think?
I don't know. I think we might see one. You know, when you're talking about a Fire Pro, you're talking about a workstation class card. And workstation class cards are different because they need a different set of things than a gaming card does. And honestly, like Nvidia really does better in that market with the Quadros than AMD does with the Fire Pro. And I think most of that comes down to software. When you have a $40,000 application like AutoCAD, what you get to go with it is a video card that has drivers specifically tuned for AutoCAD. And you're paying thousands for something that is the same chip as a consumer card, but when your software costs $40,000 or more, like that's an okay business expense.
Sure.
And I think
because it has to run right.
Right.
It's making you money. So.
And so AMD needs to do well competing in that market by really committing to software engineers for drivers. The other thing they need to do is they need to have lots of polygon throughput. And frankly, their architectures have been less geared toward that than NVIDIA's for several generations, perhaps in part because they don't play in that market as much. And then memory capacity is another one because you're talking about maybe very big high-res displays, big models and data sets that you're working with that are not typical of gaming. They're just whatever I need to do, it has to fit instead of some little optimized data set for a game. And so I don't know what AMD's plans are there. Honestly, we should ask them. So I'll see if I can find out.
We'll put it in our files. All right. And someone else in the same question asks, I've gathered that TR is not getting the usual amount of love in terms of free review units. Will you still be able to write the important reviews, or are the units coming from other sources? So is this with the Fury or the 390, I guess? But
I don't know if it's with the Fury yet or not. We've had 3 PC hardware launches of note where the companies launched the products and said, like, here it is, world, like where you can buy this from us, and they didn't provide review samples. But it's not just to us; it's to lots of review sites, right? The desktop Broadwell chips, the Intel launched, we don't have those, and I'm hearing from Intel that the holdup on those is they want to make sure the BIOS is right on the motherboards, because the motherboards are kind of have to adapt. They're made for Haswell, and they are bringing Broadwell in. They have to change voltage and stuff. It's a little weird to me that you launch your product and you don't have stuff ready.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's really odd because, you know, like motherboard makers were making a big deal out of like having Broadwell ready firmware out for like Z97 boards and H97 boards. So, like, I'm wondering if there's another round of firmware updates that has to happen. But
I think that Intel's not happy with the current state of them, and they're not going to send things to reviewers until they are. So that's what's going on there. We're not special in that sense. We're also not. We also didn't get our hands on chips early like a couple of big sites did. And you know what? If these companies continue to like launch products officially without providing samples, then I think more review sites more often will have to start going around these firms and finding review units other ways. Consumers deserve to know when things are available to buy how they perform and what they look like and if they're really okay or not. And if these companies don't want to work with us on that, then a lot of other people will, I think, because there are a lot of people in the industry who have an interest in, even if it's a good story to be told, in that story getting told. So that happened. The other launch was AMD did the Carrizo launch with notebooks, and they've shipped those. And honestly, I don't know when we're going to get one of those. I think that AMD doesn't want to send out review units of a typical Carrizo notebook, which is going to be a $400 to $700 laptop, maybe a little thicker and heavier than you would like.
Right.
And
we just wrote up some of those today.
Not a great display, and maybe the touchpad isn't very good. Not because of Carrizo, but because that's the design wins that AMD has for that chip, and that's the market segment they play in. But I think that probably you won't see AMD providing folks with products until they have something that they're happy with. And then the last one is today, the Radeon 300 series stuff. They launched that and they did not provide reviewers with samples. Some people got them from like board partners in haphazard fashion. The ones that we've worked closely with over time who are happy to provide us with things, they had some delays with their cards because of some last minute changes. And so we don't have it yet. So I think we'll get them. I think in all these cases we'll get them. I think the one case where we might be something like a Carrizo. And honestly, if it's a $400 to $700 laptop and you guys really want to see a review, well, buy it. Some people may have noticed we had some staff changes at TR lately. I didn't lay anybody off, but people decided to leave. Like, I get some extra money. we spent some of it hiring people, but I probably could.
Thank you, Scott.
Yes, but I think we spend some of it on a $400 to $700 laptop if we need to. Nobody in PC hardware, except for the really high end, makes anything that you couldn't afford to buy if you had to. That's just something that the PC hardware is cheap. And I love it, right? But it's just a truth that we don't want to forget. So that's the deal, and there's a bad trend here, and we need to fight it. I think that these companies ought to work with reviewers instead of trying to go around them and spending a lot of money on paid media to get their message out. I think it's a bad sign. Just like when the studios release a movie without letting reviewers see it ahead of time. If you're putting your product out there before you let reviewers see it, there's a problem. And I think that's a bad indicator. And we'll get to these things eventually. My advice is my advice is cool your jets, whoever you are, and don't buy anything until we looked at it, because there's probably a reason that we haven't been able to get a hold of it.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the next. Where were we? Oh, I see. Okay. Someone asks, is there enough room for AMD to attempt a triple Fiji card? Granted, power consumption would be insane, but it would only need a single PCI slot.
The dual Fiji card is not super long. I guess you could do that, or you could do the thing that AMD did or Nvidia did for a while, where they had two PCBs and they did like a sandwich,
Right.
And then like run a triple looped water cooling config and then bring it out. Right? I mean, you get creative, right? You can do anything.
I can see it.
I think that's crazy insane, and I can't imagine the master card in a triple Crossfire config with 4 gigs of memory, holding you have to bring the frame buffer contents over from the other 2 cards. It's got to hold all 3 of those and drive some massive display to be worth doing.
Right.
And besides which, the triple Crossfire and SLI has never been a good proposition ever.
No.
So I think it's extremely super unlikely, and if somebody did it, it would be awesome just to see the science experiment. But no one should buy it.
Yeah. It'd be awesome, but yeah, it doesn't sound like a product that many of us would want. So.
Yep.
All right. Someone, the same questioner asks, did you confirm if Tonga has a 384-bit wide bus?
I don't miss the one about Fiji overclocking too.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Let's
address that first. Yes.
Okay.
So our same questioner asks, any word on how well Fiji overclocks? With a liquid cooling kit as default on the Fury X, I'd predict some headroom, but with HBM, one needs to be cautious.
I think with HBM, one doesn't need to be cautious. HBM has way more bandwidth than that chip can probably use at its default clocks. Now, you do have to maybe be careful with the interface pieces on that, but honestly, that's simpler than it is on other chips. So I expect the memory logic that's on the GPU not to be a problem. You're not going to want to overclock the memory stack, but so what? It's got more bandwidth by far. It's 512 gigabytes per second,
right?
And I think it's 336 gigabytes per second for the 980 Ti. This thing is a monster on memory. So turning the clock up is a natural thing, and I think that AMD has been good about this in the past. They kind of had to, but they will let you exceed that 275 watt typical limit on a card and crank it up beyond that. And I think when you do so, that there's some possibilities if you're willing to put up with more noise, because frankly you're going to need more noise to keep the GPU temperatures low and keep the power consumption from sort of running up with all the leakage to get more clock speed. But if you're willing to tolerate the vacuum cleaner, then I think there's probably real potential. This is just a guess, but I think there's real potential for those cards to perform substantially better than an overclocked Maxwell. The Maxwell stuff, Nvidia imposes some voltage limits that are fairly conservative, and with all the real-time algorithms and stuff that determine clock speed, they're all kind of the same, and we know what the limits are. This could do quite a bit more than that. I think that they said, 400 amps or something that they can deliver on the 6-phase power circuitry on the Fury X. They have built that thing to run fast, and they're not going to allow card makers to sell overclocked versions of the Fury X, so it's going to be up to you. And I put on your headsets, turn the volume way up, crank that up, and play a game. Maybe some game where you're flying or something, so it feels right that you have all that noise.
Yeah, what I'm really interested to see is, because it's a liquid cooler, right? I mean, someone could theoretically chop the liquid cooler off and put a bigger radiator on the end of it.
Yep, they could. And if they did that, then they could have potentially some interesting benefits. Yeah. So, this is one case where they're managing power with some creative stuff, including the external radiator. But if you extend that approach, and it seems like there's room to extend that approach, then you could get more.
Well, we'll find out in our review, I'm sure. So, but all right. So the final question was, did we confirm whether Tonga has a 384-bit wide bus?
So Tonga is that GPU that's on the R9 380. And there's never been, and it was on the R9 285, and there's never been a 285X or a 380X. And the question was why didn't they go ahead and do a faster one? And also, it had a 256-bit bus on those implementations. And it's pretty clear, when I looked at it, and you look at the die size, that it's big enough that the 384-bit bus would fit around the perimeter. And generally, GPUs are defined, their size is defined by a memory size-based limitation for that outer ring. So we have confirmation from multiple industry sources. An industry source that I pretty much trust, who I think has looked at X-rays, told me there's some Japanese article where they quote AMD graphics CTO Raja Koduri about the 384-bit bus, and it's some other source or two. The Carrizo materials had a die shot of what looked like a Tonga, and people in the Beyond 3D forums are like, "Look at that! Scott was right." Because you could see, if you look at a die shot, you can see like the clusters of PHYs and stuff for memory, and you can tell.
Right.
And so, yeah, Tonga has a 384-bit bus, and they're not using all of it. And so I got to ask a better question than that, because we already had that confirmed, which is why not, right? Why are they not using all of it in some card? And you know what the answer is? And this is pretty intuitive when you think about it, actually, I guess. But the additional performance that they get out of that would let them make another product. But their claim is, and I think they probably were right about this, that there wasn't really room in their product stack for it, because they had to be more aggressive with pricing cards based on the higher end Hawaii chip, specifically with the R9200 series that we've seen in the market, the R9290. You remember, Jeff, they were doing big discounts. It was like, fire sale prices on the 290.
Right.
If they had a 285X, it would be slower, and it would be uncomfortably close in price, I think, to the 290. So I think AMD looked at the situation. I actually talked to, it was Matt Skinner, who's runs the Radeon stuff for them, and asked that question directly, and he was just very frank about it was just our product stack. We had to be more aggressive with Hawaii, and there you go. So
simple enough.
Yeah, so simple. They're not dumb over there. But it was weird. It was one of those sort of GPU geek things. It was weird that they never did it, and that you knew that stuff was dormant in there. But you even if you build a chip, you have to have a product that makes sense based on it. And I guess they weren't comfortable with it. There is added cost to build. You have to put more memory, and you have to have more complexity on the board and stuff if you build a 384-bit version. And I guess that they were like, no, we're just gonna make Hawaii cheaper and run with this. It could happen. It could still happen. I just don't think it ever will.
Yeah. It's like Tonga is its own kind of weird evolutionary branch, and I just I kind of follow it for that reason, but nothing ever happened with it beyond the R9285, right?
Well, just the 380, which is the same thing.
380, right, yeah.
Well, that's not true.
So.
You know what happened with Tonga is it's in the 5K iMac.
Oh, okay.
And one of my crackpot theories was that the reason we weren't getting the 384-bit version is that they were choosing all of the very best Tonga chips to go into the 5K iMacs. And, they have to run at low voltage, and they want to get good clock speeds.
Right. And
that's why they did it. But it doesn't have, as far as we know, it's actually 256-bit implementation in the 5K iMac too. But again, that's not really down to binning. That's down to what the solution is that Apple wanted. But yeah, that chip is good business for AMD if they don't even sell a lot of the R9285s or 380s or whatever, because they're selling it to Apple.
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. Okay, what's our next question? Okay, so impressions of AMD's claims of performance of the Fury X versus the GTX 980 Ti. Are they what you expected? Are they lower, better, etc.? Any performance predictions for when you get one in the lab?
So let's bring up the performance numbers.
Yeah.
That AMD published.
We just did this today.
Right, and AMD published some performance numbers. These are their own numbers. They're not ours. Ours look prettier, but and are better in other ways in terms of the metrics we use, I think. But these are 4K gaming benchmarks that compare, according to AMD, the Radeon R9 Fury X against the GeForce GTX 980 Ti. And they show across a range of games that the Fury X either very slightly beats or less than slightly beats the R9 or the GTX 980 Ti. And asking what I expected to see, it depends on when you ask. When you ask me, like, what past me are you talking about? If you're talking about the version of me that came out of Tuesday and all the announcements they did, honestly, I expected something like this. If you're talking about the version of me that had looked at the HBM stuff before that, I expected more because the memory bandwidth delta is way more than the performance delta that you're seeing in most of these games. So yeah, the thing about this that is, a little bit probably, like, I'm guessing you kind of look at this and you squint and you think about what manufacturers do when they decide to put together a slide of performance benchmarks, and you think, well, they're going to use the settings that work best for their card compared to the competition. They're going to pick the games where they do the best. Not a single one of these shows the GeForce faster than the Radeon. Not a single one of these do they do anything other than average FPS, which is just about potential and not delivered smoothness in a game. And you start to think, man, I think this is going to be a toss-up. Right?
Right.
And I could be wrong. Like, maybe we'll be surprised when we do our own testing about what happens when you've got a GPU with all that amazing amounts of memory bandwidth and shader ALUs, because it has a ton of those too. But because clearly there are some places where it simply doesn't have bottlenecks compared to the competition. So that may be good. But right now, looking at these numbers, I'm like, I think this is a toss-up. And so the thing that we should do if we're talking about these numbers is we should talk about some of the architecture, don't you think?
Sure.
So the architecture is, when I'm talking about that, I'm really talking about just architectural rates. We could get into, like, the chiclets that they put in here. Like, here they are, they're packed in like this, and they've got that, But this is just a bigger GCN than Hawaii. It's got some updates to certain pieces of it that I talk about and call out in this article. None of them are super significant for just gaming graphics performance all by themselves. And a lot of them have to do with just power efficiency, which is important because they put 4096 shaders into a chip. And you look at the power on Hawaii, and then you're like, and they put like 50% approximately more shaders in, like, oh my God, like, this is hard, right? Like, how did they deal with it? And one of the answers, like we said, is you keep it even cooler to reduce leakage. But some of the other answers have to do with, like, power gating off parts of that shader array when they're not being used more aggressively. So just earnest things that you do to improve your power efficiency. They do a better job with the voltage frequency combinations that they pick for the operation of the chip. I think they're able to be a little bit smarter about that. They're also willing to tolerate some variance from card to card that they weren't in the past. Nvidia has tolerated that for a couple generations with its GPU boost, and that lets them pick better tuning points with a little bit, like, less margin, not less extra voltage built in, so they can be more power efficient. So there's some reasons why they're able to do this, but yeah, it's a bigger Hawaii at the end of the day. The weird thing about it in some ways is how it's not different from Hawaii, because the Hawaii and the R9290X has, in some cases, the exact same complement of resources as this. So let me pull up one of my famous tables, and Hawaii has the same number of render backends or ROPs, which means that it's oomph for things like drawing pixels on the screen in 4K or any resolution, for blending for multi-sampled anti-aliasing, which is an important function of the render backend, and for depth and stencil for things like shadowing algorithms. Those are the same between Hawaii and Fiji. Like, they're the same. And the clock speeds are similar. We can. Here's the corrected one with the clock speeds of the actual products, and you can see it's the same pixel fill rate, it's the same ROP rate, it's the same rasterization rate too, because it has the same basic number of geometry front ends and rasterizers. So it doesn't really, like, at least not on paper, it doesn't really have more polygon throughput, and so that's a little weird that they didn't grow. The thing about it is they got significant growth in other areas, including the shader array, which you go from about 6 teraflops to about 8.6 teraflops between 290X and Radeon Fury. And 8.6 is insane. The Titan X is 6.6. This thing is 8.6.
Right.
And the memory bandwidth, we talked about that, from 346 gigabytes per second to 512. And the Titan X is only 336. And then the filtering rate for texturing, there's a nice substantial gain, sort of on the order of what they did with the shader arithmetic for the texture filtering, which goes along with the shaders. The shaders need to access memory, and they do that through the texture units, and then also the additional bandwidth. You want additional access to the memory in the chip. So all of that works. It's nice, but then other areas they don't gain at all. And you compare against the GM200, and which is the chip in the GTX 980 Ti, and there's some weird things. It's kind of similar because there's so much growth in memory bandwidth and shader arithmetic that they are clearly better. They clearly outclass the 980 Ti. But when you look at texturing, then it's kind of a toss-up depending on the format. Like the Fury X is clearly faster with integer texturing, but not with the FP16 formats. It depends on the game and the mix of things, how that looks. And then Nvidia built just a big pixel engine for 4K with the GM200. They've got a lot of pixel fill rate, a lot of anti-aliasing power in their ROPs, and it's about like a third more than what Fury X has, which hasn't gained from Hawaii. So architecturally speaking, it's a really different mix of performance coming out of the new Radeon than out of the new GeForces. That's going to mean that different games are going to perform very differently, which is one reason that the numbers that we've seen from AMD don't entirely persuade me they're totally valid. I expect to see there's some wins on the GM200 side, and maybe some big wins on their side, and maybe some bigger wins on the AMD side too, depending on the workload. Now, modern games use similar engines and workloads in terms of certain things, so maybe it won't be that dramatic, but depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a ton of tessellation and have a lot of geometry, maybe because you used Nvidia GameWorks, then you're going to run better on a GeForce. And if you're using a rich array of like shader effects and lighting and post-processing, maybe some compute-based post-processing, you're going to run better probably on Fury X. That's just kind of the shape of it right now. And I think that we're going to have a lot of fun as we test these things over time, because the performance is not going to be, even though we're seeing rough parity is how I describe the performance numbers we've seen so far, given my tamp down for AMD's maybe own biases, the ways that they get there are very different. And so this is going to be an interesting time. So yeah, that's architecture. There's some other detailed things about what they changed in GCN, but honestly, I don't think we should get into that too much.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of talk about the ending of my article here on architecture, because it was fascinating to me. I asked the graphics CTO at AMD, Raja Kaduri, after I kind of had a sense that, okay, looks like they're going to match the 980 Ti instead of just beating the pants off of it, even though they did HBM and they have way more memory bandwidth, and that's a key constraint in graphics. You would expect that they get competitive advantage, and instead they're going to come out with a narrow competitive advantage or rough parity instead of a win, a clean win, a dramatic win. And I kind of asked him about that, like what happened there, like why didn't you want more? And he said, let me rephrase your question. Why didn't we build a bigger engine? Which is how you take advantage of more memory bandwidth, right? As you build a bigger chip.
Right.
And he pointed out that the way that the HBM-based GPU solution is structured was a limitation. The GPU actually doesn't sit on just a package with a ball grid array like normal. It sits on what's called an interposer.
Right.
And the interposer it's not a chip, but it's made like a chip. And it's kind of it's a chip with no transistors. It's just got pathways. It connects the DRAM stacks to the GPU, and it's very parallel wide, just dumb chip-like substrate that these things communicate over. And the interposer, because it's made like a chip, can only be so large. It's limited by the size of the reticle, the focusing optics in photolithography. And so the GPU has to fit on the interposer with the DRAM stacks. And so the GPU can only be so big. And they went to right out to he said they're within plus minus 4 square millimeters. So not 4 total, they're not a 4 total. We're talking 4 square, by both dimensions, you multiply them out, you get a total of 4, almost no play to make the GPU any bigger than they did. So they made it as big as they possibly could, given the physical limitations. And there's a picture here, if you're watching the video live stream, of a Fiji with an interposer, which is the shiny part at the bottom here, and then you've got 4 little DRAM stacks with HBM DRAM stacked up. There's just a 3D type solution, and then the GPU in the middle. And you can see there's no extra way that a square rectangular GPU could grow on that thing. So what we wound up with is a chip that has way more memory bandwidth, but it can't grow any larger than this. And as a result, it's about the same size as the GM200 from Nvidia, but Nvidia's physical footprint is much larger because they have external DRAM chips, right? Instead of being packed on this little thing. So, using completely different approaches and with vast differences in memory bandwidth in favor of AMD, you wind up with something closer to parity because AMD can't build a bigger engine to take advantage of the additional memory. And, AMD invested a lot in making HBM happen. Nvidia invested a lot in building a more efficient architecture. So they've got the GM200 with the similar size to Fiji, but it has these DRAM pads in it. Physical stuff for DRAM takes up a lot of die space that you don't have to burn all that on Fiji, because HBM is much simpler on the GPU side. But they have, even though they have less space for all their shaders and stuff, they're basically more efficient with them. That's what they've invested in with Maxwell, is a new architecture. And so they take totally different routes to come to similar performance. So it's this weird parity. And honestly, I think, both of these guys, I think when they were looking at this generation of parts, I don't think the GM200 was the first Maxwell chip, but notice it's a 200, not a 100. I think they probably, when they were first building, both of these companies were targeting a 20 or 16 nanometer process at TSMC, where they build a much denser chip. And that hasn't worked out. We're still building on the same thing we were in late 2011.
Right, and we were talking about that before the show, is, the process size or the feature size is the limitation here for them. So
I think that the bet on HBM, where you get all that bandwidth, would have paid off more if they were able to get to the smaller process size, because then they could build a bigger engine in the die space that they have. And the dynamics of things look different at that next node, and I think that the dynamics would be favorable for this. If the GPU was built on that node for this memory subsystem being attached to it, and the thing is, I think that's going to happen with the next generation of GPUs. But I expect Nvidia to have HBM at that time as well.
Yeah.
So, this is just, the plan was different. But what we have now is a really interesting fight where there's going to be a lot of bitching and moaning about GameWorks and games and stuff, because the difference between one game workload and the other will determine a lot of whether Fiji is faster or GM200 is faster. And it's going to be weird because there's like clear advantages on one side for the Nvidia GPUs in terms of geometry processing and ROP throughput, and clear advantages on the other side for the AMD stuff in terms of memory access, texturing, and ALUs. So, yeah,
it's going to be fun reviews.
Yeah, and we haven't even tested this thing yet, so I expect there are some surprises in store. But I think that maybe like some of these issues, like memory capacity, 4 gig versus 8, and all that, will become less important once we get the things in hand and we start seeing, like maybe like the mode that you tested with for AA becomes a much bigger deal, or this setting for tessellation or something, because that's where the real like wild differences are.
Right. Well, you will have fun, I suspect.
I will.
Those differences out.
I'm already having fun. So
yeah. All right. So are we done with our architecture discussion? Do you want to move on?
I'm done with a lot of things. What else do we have to do?
We have a couple more reader questions.
Okay.
If you like it.
Yeah, let's do them.
So someone asks, is AMD losing money selling this presumably the Fury X, selling at $650? Are they losing money at that price point?
I'm a reviewer, but AMD doesn't tell me their cost structure on their products.
Right.
Like if they did, I would be like an analyst and a really good one, and I would sell you my report.
Yeah,
because then you would know like about all sorts of things. You could figure out what was going to happen in their next annual or next quarterly earnings. But I don't think that a $650 graphics card is ever bad business to have. We talked about PC hardware being cheap. Even though this is an expensive part, they're going to mass manufacture these, and I don't think that their costs will be terrible. Now, there is an issue with cost on HBM. It's new.
Right.
The way that you drive down cost in chips is you sell a lot of something, then you can make a lot of copies of it, and then each one is cheap. We're not there yet with HBM entirely. AMD needs to probably move a lot of these, and that's why things start with high-end parts, right? Because there's a lot of margin built into them. There's a lot of profit built into them. And so you can absorb the additional costs of something like starting up on new memory tech in a $650 product. That's probably why the MacBook costs so much, because they put that crazy display in there that lets more light through.
Right.
And so you do that in your high margin part, and then eventually you can stick that thing in the iPad. But actually, I don't know. The iPad may be a high margin part too, but that's a different conversation.
I think everything.
Everything Apple sells is a high margin part or a high margin product. But yeah. I don't think that they have a problem. The only issue they might have is if they got into a price war with Nvidia. Nvidia's costs may be nicer on the 980 Ti than AMD's are on the Fury X, especially with water cooling too. Some of that stuff has got some additional costs associated with it. But I don't think there's anyone at AMD who would be upset if they sold a ton of $650 graphics cards. I don't think they lose money, and I don't think it gets worse with volume.
Have we addressed this yet? Yeah, we talked about memory earlier. Someone asks, is 4 gigabytes enough for Fury since it's more targeted to high resolution gaming?
We'll see.
Yeah. And do you think that AMD launching this new memory early will keep them ahead of Nvidia for a significant amount of time? We probably just answered that.
Well, I mean, a significant amount of time is, like, I don't know.
Right.
I originally had some concerns because talking with AMD about HBM, one of their guys said, it's possible that the competition will waterfall HBM2, I think is probably what they'll use, across their whole stack before we do ours. But I talked with some people about that kind of off the record at the AMD thing. AMD people, I can't really... Anyway, there was just confidence expressed about that. The thing is, they can't tell me their roadmap, and they haven't told anyone their plans for additional HBM parts. We know about Fiji. We don't know about anything else. But, there's a big difference between shipping an HBM-based product and having something on your roadmap for the future. And AMD ships now, and this thing works. They have an advantage, and it would behoove them to, it'd be a good thing for them to go ahead and bring out a lower end product, a $300 graphics card with an HBM solution sooner rather than later. They've been a little slow on their cadence on some of this stuff, but I think if they can at all manage to pull the finances together, they're going to do that as quickly as they can, and they should. Because honestly, I think HBM is a better solution. I don't think there's any question about that.
Right.
But there are some questions about, like, would they use two pieces of DRAM stack, and what would that look like in the lower end part? But I think that they figure that out. They probably have a better chance to get that out first than Nvidia. But we'll see.
All right. This is an interesting one. Someone asks, what level of compatibility will the Fiji have with DirectX 12?
Oh, man.
So is this 12.0, 12.1?
Fiji does not have conservative rasterization, which is one of the things that NVIDIA built into Maxwell that is one of those 12.1 features. Conservative rasterization is useful for certain rendering techniques, and I can't imagine that AMD cares at all, because look at that shader array. Like, just do it, brute force it.
Yeah.
Like, they don't care. Like, they just, we can do that math. I mean, I can't imagine that they care. And that's what this comes down to. Once we got to DirectX 10/11 level, and everybody does, like, 32-bit floating point per channel, red, green, blue, alpha, and they've got all the precision that you need, they can do the math to create an effect without specific hardware acceleration. So features become less important in DirectX. They play into performance, but you can do anything more or less with a modern graphics card with the right data types. It's just a question of how quickly you can do it. And not having something like conservative rasterization, but having 8.6 teraflops on tap, man, I just don't care. Like, we shouldn't be arguing about DirectX feature levels. And NVIDIA, like, explicitly stopped talking about them in the Kepler generation, and they've started talking about them a little bit recently. And I think the reason is because they detected something that they can get a talking point out of. And I like new features. I like, hey, conservative raster for interesting graphics rendering techniques. But I am not at all persuaded that's going to matter a lot. Yeah, and the weird thing is, where it's going to matter is NVIDIA's going to build a GameWorks library that uses conservative raster, and they hand it off to somebody, and then it's like, you just turn on this thing, and it won't work on a Radeon, but it's great on our card.
I think we just wrote up a piece, actually, where they did a demo, and they used the conservative raster hardware, I guess, or acceleration to do part of it. So it's prescient.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's bad to have that, but honestly, I don't know how bad. I don't think it's awful not to have it when you have an 8.6 teraflop shader array. So,
all right. Another questioner asks, do you think the Fury and 300 series are enough to compete with Nvidia and gain market share?
So the competitive question is really kind of interesting right now because the latest market share numbers that we've seen coming out of some of the analyst firms are putting things at around 70% for Nvidia and 30% for AMD. And what I've been hearing behind the scenes is that, like, once you take high-end cards into account, that it gets maybe even more dire than that, where you might be in like single digits for AMD. Now the sources I have there are a little, I don't know, but right now the market share situation is not what it has been historically. AMD has been losing and it's hurting. And I think they took a hit when the whole Bitcoin thing happened. And all the coin miners bought those cards. Everybody wanted a Hawaii card. They wanted a 290. And they couldn't buy them, and they bought Nvidia's. And then another weird hit came when, last October the GTX 970 came out, and it was really good for $336, and the 290 price needed to come down, and it didn't come down for like 6 months. Like, they did little discounts here and there in the card makers, right? But they didn't. And then when they brought it down, it was like fire sale, like friggin'. Put the inflatable gorilla on the roof, and we got the, spotlight and it going, and Crazy Dave is out there in his plaid overalls. We're selling them, But for way too long, they kept the price high. And gamers, like, reinforced by these multiple events, have moved to NVIDIA and stayed there. And there are probably other dynamics there. Our frame latency stuff has shown NVIDIA is better, which means, like, when you're talking about two competing cards, generally speaking, with NVIDIA's driver support and the way they've been doing their optimization and engineering, like, if you say these two are equal in FPS, the GeForce is a little better experience overall. And then NVIDIA's winning on power consumption. So if you look at price and performance, AMD is right there. But you throw in that third dimension, and it's not close. So there are a lot of reasons why market share has shifted. Honestly, the shift is maybe more dramatic than it should be, given everything. And if the Furies do well, and the Nano does well, and AMD captures some of the sort of halo with that, and if they do consistently well on new games, get their drivers out on time, which I think is a big if. I think they have an opportunity here to shift things back. Say that they're back to 60-40 instead of 70-30, or they're both 28-72 or whatever they're at. Right? That's significant for them. So there's significant opportunity. They don't have to win to win back a whole lot of business. They could be second place, but be at 45%, and they'll be way better off than they have been.
All right. Someone asked about Fury's the Fiji die size. They're asking whether it's bigger than GM200. Do we know that?
GM200 is 601 square millimeters, and I've got this table in the article I just wrote. It's like 596 for Fiji. So they're within less than 10 square millimeters difference in die size. So they're very different solutions because of the HBM and the interposer and all that stuff. I don't know that you can compare them as much as you would in the past, but we do have similar performance with similar die size on the same process tech.
So another questioner asks, are we going to see DVI support, I guess, on the Fury X? Because as it stands, this card does not ship with DVI. It has DisplayPort and HDMI out only, I think.
I think I thought about this because I looked at it and thought, man, that's a missing thing that you're used to seeing. And honestly, you shouldn't miss it. And I'll tell you why. This is a $650 graphics card. What are you doing? Like, you should be plugging it into one of two things: 4K display, or a 144 hertz, 120 hertz variable refresh, 2560 by 1440 type display, or something in that class. There are going to be people who, like, I have a 30-inch in front of my face. I have a 30-inch 2560 by 1600 display that is ancient, but I love it. IPS, it's a good panel. It's 60 hertz, so it's not the greatest for gaming, but it's good enough a lot of times. And I think folks who are disappointed there can get an adapter. There are DisplayPort to DVI adapters. I don't even know that it's all that expensive. I think they're pretty cheap.
I think HDMI can be it's really easy to adapt to DVI because the signaling is the same. So
I wouldn't be too concerned about that, but I would tell you the Fury X will not have DVI natively because the Fury X, we know what it looks like, and board partners are not free to modify it. The Fury at 550, board partners will be able to modify that, and I would expect to see some DVI ports on some of those cards. In fact, I bet that most of them ship with them.
And we already know the situation with the Broadwell socketed chips. So
Are
that
we at the end of our
questions. That's the reader questions. So I'm going to open the floor up to the chat again if anybody has any other questions about Fiji, anything else that happened at E3 this week.
Yeah, if you guys want to talk about, I went to the PC gaming show, which AMD helped host.
We can talk about that a little bit.
I live tweeted about that a whole bunch, and it was really cool up to about the hour and 45-minute mark, and then there was like 45 minutes of butt pain and fidgeting. It was like there was cool people on stage showing me stuff I wanted to see, but I didn't really have the physical stamina to continue watching. And I was in the very middle of the second row, and like all the people were seeing the back of my head on the live stream, and so like I had to be good, right? And I was sitting there like if I weren't on this stream, I would leave. But it was like 80,000 people watching like the back of my head, and I had to just sit there, and so I just tweeted smart Alex stuff and waited for it to end and paid attention. I mean, they brought in all the big guns. They had Blizzard there. They had ArenaNet. I'm all just RPG guys, but there was a ton of folks. So, no, it was.
Is that something you think they're going to do again? Do you think it was enough of a success this year that they'll try and?
I think PC Gamer put it together with AMD. I think they got a lot of money from AMD to do it, and I think they got money from every one of those developers who had stage time, which is why they had so many of them. And I expect that was a very successful business, and they had 80,000 some people streaming it. I think that's the number I heard from somebody. Anyway, given all that, it seems likely that we'll see that again.
Gotcha.
The other thing is credit to the PC Gamer guys. There was a need for a PC presence at E3. We had these big press conferences from Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo, and we didn't, maybe EA or Bethesda or whoever, we didn't have a PC-focused thing because Microsoft is a terrible custodian for Windows and PC gaming. Right. Oh my gosh. And Valve didn't want to do it, and we didn't have like Blizzard or anybody doing it by themselves. They've got their own BlizzCon and whatever. I'm glad somebody did it, and so I hope they do it again. I hope that they make it shorter, and I hope that they maybe make sure that, well, really shorter is all I really care about.
Yeah, right.
I'd love to see more people there. I'd love to see more success on their part. I'd love to see more of some of the big names, and I was happy to see some of the indie people there. The woman who had done the that game where you play as a blind girl and you can't see. I forget the name of it. That was amazing, and I was glad that she had the chance to tell her story. And so I don't want it to be just big AAA developers or folks like that. But I did want to see Valve. I wanted to see Gaben take the stage and bring the house down. And I was happy to see Blizzard. And I'd like to see more. I'd like to see more of all those guys. And I'd even like to see the VR people get in on it. I wish John Carmack would have come on stage.
Yeah.
Do it up, right? It's PC gaming. Everybody is there.
Right.
Because it's E3, everybody from the industry is in town, make it a big thing. It'd be awesome.
One of our chatters asks, "Are we going to specifically test to find where the limit lies with the Fury's 4 gigabytes of RAM?" I think we addressed the flaws with those benchmarking tools.
No, well, we addressed the fact that the tools aren't great, but it doesn't mean you can't build a specific test. And we talked about what that test would look like.
Right.
Do we plan on doing that? Yes. Are we going to do it in the first review? It's 7 days until the review needs to be out. I don't have a driver. I don't have a card. I asked today multiple people inside of AMD, when will I get the card? I don't have an answer. What I got was, we're trying to give you an answer later today. I am not going to guarantee any particular kind of testing for that first article, but we'll address it eventually. So that's what I got to tell you.
Another chatter asks, like, I guess I'm trying to follow this, but when we test the Fury X, are we going to use a reference GTX 980 Ti as the comparison point, or I guess as opposed to like the Gigabyte G1 Gaming, the triple fan thingy with all the overclocks going?
Oh, which, yeah, Kelly Lemon Drop asked. Yeah. She says that's fair because that's what you did with the 290X versus the 970, 980. And the answer to that question is that if you look at our 980 Ti review, that the R9 290X that we tested was an aftermarket Asus card with a much larger cooler. We did that in part because if you look at the reference cooler on the 290X, it's not capable of keeping the shipping GPUs at their highest clocks all the time, and we found performance differences between our review units and the reference shipping 290Xs. The way that we get around like this sticky problem is we tested with the Asus. It was higher clocked, it has a bigger cooler, it's quieter, and it's a better product. And it's the one you should buy if you're an enthusiast. And we did the same thing with the GTX 980 where we tested with the Gigabyte card. I have no qualms about testing with a shipping consumer product. You notice that at the end of our reviews, we have a price performance matrix, and we take into account if there's a premium on those products, that the price is higher when we look at price and performance. We can't have every data point, but honestly, the price and the performance don't usually move more than about 10% on these things anyway. And, you know, I want to test what I would want to buy. And that's what I try and do. So, you know, if people think we're biased because we're doing that, I think they're not paying attention. We clearly will use the best cards that we can, the ones we would want to buy. In some cases, we've been able to do all reference. In other cases, we have better cards available, and we decided to use them. And I think that's oftentimes the right choice. In some cases, you could use either and whatever. You know, do the price, do the performance, show people what you got. It doesn't matter a lot one way or the other. But when people get upset about this stuff, aren't paying attention to the way that we tested, you know, or the reasons why we tested like we did. You know, if there's a better product available, we generally will grab it. If it's early in the cycle, maybe all we have is a reference unit, we'll test that. But we follow up with reviews of the individual cards, you know, from the folks at MSI and Asus and places like that. And, you know, those are good, oftentimes, really good. And that's what I'm going to tell people to buy, so that's what I'm going to test. So, yeah.
All right, fair enough. So shift gears here real quick. Someone asks, when are we expecting Intel to announce Skylake?
Wow, I saw an email today that had a rumor about that, and I haven't cracked it open and paid attention. But man, I think it could be before Q4.
Right, that's what my impression of it was like late autumn, somewhere in there. Because we already know what some of the motherboards look like. Like some of the Z170 boards came out at Computex. Yeah. And so, I mean, that's smoke, at least.
Yeah. And so I think it's coming soon. And so that's exciting because I think we're hoping Skylake means like a real performance improvement on the desktop in a way that we haven't had for a little while. So we'll see.
And that's the end of the file. Again.
Okay.
So,
cool. I think we should wrap this thing up, man.
I think we're good.
We've had a good run here, and I've worked hard all day, and I'm tired.
Yeah.
And I've got to get up and start thinking about Fury X testing in the morning. So I got to say, we had more people join their chat for this one than I think we ever have had. Thank you guys for coming.
It's been great. It's been
very
great.
much appreciate it. Jeff Campman, this is the first time that you and I have done this solo, and I appreciate you're a very good sidekick in keeping me on track. So thanks for doing that. And we may try this format in the future. We may try some other things, but we're still learning how to do this with the live stream on video, and I think we're getting better. So, give us your feedback. Follow us on Twitch if you can, and we'll keep working on it. Anyway, right. I think that's it for this episode of the Tech Report podcast.
Sounds good. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
After.